This is Samboy Terry from Greet Death, and you are listening to The New Scene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The New Scene. I'm your host, Keith, and we're back with another brand new episode. And on the show today, we have the one, the only, Sean Leary of Loma Prieta and now Jeromes Dream. Loma Prieta has been at it for a while now. They're an excellent band on Deathwish Inc., and they've got a new record coming out, Last. We talk about that. We talk about the history of Loma Prieta. We talk about Sean joining Jeromes Dream and recording their excellent new record, The Gray In Between, which you've heard me talking about. We cover everything. And that conversation is coming up shortly. But first, here's how you can support The New Scene. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at New Scene Pod. Shirts. We've got shirts for sale at Deathwish Inc. Short sleeve, long sleeve, logo tees, a custom designed shirt. We've got it all. Pick one up. It's a great way to support the show. Reviews. Give us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And did you know that you can write a review on Apple Podcasts? And I've got a new one here right now from Evil Cause, and I am going to read it to you. 5 stars. This brings some happiness to my day. I discovered this pod from the Philip Jameson episode, and I quickly found myself going to episode 1 and starting to listen to everything in chronological order. I play in bands, and I just love hearing all the good and bad band life scenarios. I also really appreciate Keith and Tommy's honesty and openness talking about addiction and mental health issues. You guys cover everything, light and dark, along with some technical music conversation with a wide variety of guests. Sometimes you even manage to get an actual laugh out of me. Keep it up. It's great. Thank you, Evil Cause. I will keep it up. And I love when people go back and listen to all the episodes like that. It's still unimaginable to me that Tommy and I started this thing kind of on a whim, and it's all out there and people just pick up on it and go through the whole thing. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Evil Cause, and thank you, everybody who supports the show. All right, so moving on. Don't forget to support Iodine Recordings. Jeromes Dream is on tour right now in support of their new record, The Gray In Between. Catch them if they're coming through your city. I'll be at the Brooklyn show June 2nd at St. Vitus. Come by, say hi. Best X have just released a new single, Tell Your Friends. It's available now on all streaming services. There Were Wires, Live Wires EP. This is a live recording of the band from February 2002, a performance they did on 88.9 WERS in Boston. And that's available now everywhere for streaming. Audio Karate, a Show of Hands EP is available now for pre-order, and the new single, A Show of Hands, is available now to stream everywhere. And finally, Quicksand will be playing Riot Fest. Have you picked up the re-release of Slip yet? It's out there. You should. It's Slip. Slip by Quicksand. I mean, come on. Don't forget to sign up for the Iodine email list. You'll find out about everything first. For more information, head to the Iodine Instagram at Iodine Recordings or to the Iodine website at iodinerecordings.com. Also, don't forget to support this month's sponsor, Deathwish Inc. That's right, Deathwish Inc. You know them, you love them, and if you don't, you should. Now, Deathwish is historically a fantastic label, right? Right, we know that. But Greet Death, one of my favorite bands, is on Deathwish Inc. And if Greet Death was the only band on Deathwish Inc., I would take all of the money out of my bank account each month and send it directly to Deathwish Inc. and then hope that some of that money makes it to Greet Death. Telling you, I would. So here's what's going on at Deathwish. Converge is repressing Axe to Fall. That's one of my personal favorite Converge records right there. And now you can get this new repress on vinyl. It's a modern classic, and I say modern because to me, 2009 was 5 years ago. Also, Converge has upcoming tour dates with Brutus and Frail Body. You have to go to that. That's a killer lineup right there. Check out that show if it's in a city near you. Loma Prieta, Last, is out June 30th, and you're going to hear all about that and more when we talk to Sean Leary momentarily. Gouge Away is back, and they have a new single, Idealized. They've got some select tour dates kicking off in July. Go check them out. For more information, head to the Deathwish Instagram at Deathwish Inc. or to the Deathwish website at deathwishinc.com. Okay. How about we do some music recommendations? Now, I'm going to give you two. Incendiary. Change the way you think about pain. That just dropped. Great band. Great record. I was listening to it walking somewhere just yesterday, and I wanted to... What is the lyrics in the one song? Every window deserves a brick. How good is that? How good is that? And you know what? Every window does deserve a brick, except mine. Except mine. So let's keep it calm out there. But listen, great record. Highly recommended. And the band Dosser. Have you heard Dosser out of Maryland yet? They keep popping up in my Spotify radio, you know, like when you're listening to something and then it stops, it ends, and it just takes you to other bands in a similar vein. Well, Dosser keeps popping up, and they're really good. Let's see, what records? Violent Picture, Violent Sound. It's got a pink cover, and Brain Scan. It's got a green cover. Those two records keep popping up, and I really like what I hear. Check it out. All right, so listen, check back in with me after the interview with Sean. I'll tell you what's going on with me. It's Memorial Day weekend. I've got some time off. That's great. We'll talk about everything. But right now, we are going to speak to Sean Leary of Loma Prieta and Jeromes Dream. Enjoy. All right. We are here now with Sean Leary. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to have this conversation.
Absolutely, Sean. And thank you for being here. You know, you've got a lot going on. We have a new Loma Prieta single. Could there be a new album? Could there not? We don't know, but we're going to find out soon. You have joined Jeromes Dream. That's exciting. They've got a new album coming up, and we're going to get to all of that, Sean. But first, I have to ask you, how are you doing today?
You know, I'm doing pretty good. It has been raining out here in California for weeks and weeks, and today I woke up and it was just beautiful outside. I mean, it was cold by California standards, but I feel a little weight off my shoulders. You know, it's been so gloomy. And I live here because I don't like it gloomy. So, you know, we're back.
That's amazing. Where in California are you?
I'm in the Bay Area. I live in a city called Vallejo, which is the northernmost city on the San Francisco Bay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a cool little town. I moved out here a couple of years ago. I was in San Francisco for almost 20 years, and now I'm doing something else, and it feels good.
I love the Bay Area. San Francisco is the only city I've been to where I was sad to leave it and come back to New York City.
Uh-huh.
Like, I liked it that much. I like San Jose. I like everywhere I've been out there. It's really nice.
It's a really great part of the world. You know, I grew up out here, and I've left a couple times. I moved to the East Coast a couple times, and nothing felt permanent aside from, you know, as soon as I'd leave here, I'd kind of be like, well, this is interesting. It's cool being in a different place, but yeah, there's something special out here. And as expensive as it's gotten and everything, I've like thought about leaving. And I think that my stubbornness has kept me here because I'm like, well, I belong out here, you know, like my family's been out here for generations. I'm going to find a way to make it work. I
think my philosophy is if it's time to move somewhere else, I'll know it's time to move somewhere else. I'm in Brooklyn. I've been here for the past, 11 years now. And I've thought about leaving, and I felt like I should leave because maybe times were bad. And I've even thought like, oh no, I'm going to have to leave. Like, what if I meet somebody and like she wants to move out of the city? I'm going to have to move. And then I'm like, wait, you don't have to do anything. Like, you can just stay here. Like, you can insist on staying here. You can make the decision to stay here forever if you want to. And I was like, oh, right, I'm just going to do that.
It's in your court. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I want that because it is hard to live here in New York City, in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I'm very lazy. So, I like the idea of I walk 1 block to the store. I walk 2 blocks to the grocery store.
Right.
I walk 3 blocks to the laundromat. Everything's very close. I don't know. I need that.
I know. And I miss that. That was how San Francisco was for me. And I spent a couple of years, half the time in Brooklyn, actually, because I had a girlfriend at the time that was living there. And 2 years of half the time was like enough New York City for me. But I also get it, like it was on the table. Like I was like, well, the reasonable thing would be for me to move to New York right now, but I'm just so West Coast, man. I can't, I couldn't. And honestly, I felt like I took the energy of New York back with me after being there for 6 months out of the year for a couple of years. And that was kind of why I think I ended up leaving San Francisco, because I was getting so, like I was just pissed off all the time by everything, like just by being in close proximity to people. And I'm like, that's typical. I feel like that's typical New York behavior, and I sort of love it.
Yeah.
I don't know, man, maybe I'm too sensitive for that or something. It just wasn't, if I felt like I was just, deteriorating, I was like, man, I need some fucking space. Got to get away from all these people.
Yeah, I feel like that too. I spend a lot of time at home, but that's fine. I get out enough. It's fine. There's everything balanced.
Right.
So wait, it's raining up there too? People are telling me it's snowing out there. It's cold. Like, what is going on?
Dude, it fully was snowing out here. I mean, not at my house, but in, above 1,000 feet, it was snowing last week. And that is unheard of. Like, I've been out here aside from the couple years I spent away, it's like I've been out here for 40 something years, and maybe that's happened once. So that was cool,
That is wild. Like you're talking about when it was nice out today and you just felt some hope. I felt that this past Sunday because, it's the dead of winter. It's cold. It's a mild winter, but you still feel it. And I went outside Sunday night, 5:00 to go get food, as I always do. And it was still light out at 5 p.m.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God, spring is coming. And I felt a glimpse of hope for a moment. It was nice.
Yeah, I know the feeling well. Yeah, we're getting there. We're going to get through this.
We have to. We just have to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sean, let's get to know you. Did you grow up in the Bay Area?
I did. I grew up not far from where I live now. I grew up an hour north of San Francisco in a town called Petaluma, or kind of outside of Petaluma. I grew up in the country. And it was an interesting place to grow up. It's funny because I think because San Francisco is so wealthy, that it's become this fancy place. But when I was a kid, it was definitely poor hippie people like my mom was, and then farmers. It's sort of a Northern California thing. Like once you get past the Bay Area, there's from north of the Bay all the way up to like Oregon is sort of this strange thing where it's like very conservative people and very liberal people kind of trying to coexist, I guess. So that was my experience growing up in the 80s and 90s in the North Bay. But it was a cool place to grow up. And there was, as it turned out, when I got to be like 13, there was totally like a punk scene and a cool venue and a lot of like interesting local bands and stuff. So, I feel fortunate all the time that I grew up there, even though I just fucking hated it so much when I was a teenager and I was just trying to get out like as soon as I could.
Tell us about, you mentioned that there was a local venue and a punk scene. I'm interested in your history with music leading up to discovering punk. I mean, were you always interested in music as a kid growing up?
Yeah, I really was. And I think my, neither of my parents were musicians, but they both really like loved music, as it sort of felt like really like the main form of entertainment in my house. And it was, it wasn't like there was specifically like sophisticated music being played or anything, but it was just important. I think that my mom really connected with the stuff that she'd come up with, which was all like the hippies, the Beatles and kind of like older stuff than that, like a lot of doo-wop and, like really old oldies, pre-hippie oldies, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Remember when oldies meant like 50s stuff?
Yeah. I it's funny. I'm so nostalgic for that stuff because when I was a kid in the 80s, it would be like, we listened to oldies radio everywhere we went, like when we were driving, and oldies at the time, they never played the Beatles on the oldies station when I was a kid. It was fully like Dion and the Belmonts or some shit, like it was like old shit.
You just jogged my memory as you're talking, because my parents listened to the 70s and 80s classic rock, Beatles, hippie stuff.
Right.
And there was this station, Oldies 98, that would play all the doo-wop stuff, and they like that too.
Yeah, man, I'm still all about it. Strange as that sounds, doesn't seem to have a lot of influence on the music I make, but I like listening to it.
Yeah, I would say not. And talk about discovering punk rock and the scene in your town. What kind of bands did you see? What grabbed you?
It's interesting. It was like the trajectory seems like, when I think back on it, it all happened so fast, right? Because it was like, first, when I was like a little kid, I have an older half brother who he's 16 years older than me. So I remember being like 4 or 5 and he was playing me all this stuff that just seemed wild to me at the time. Like, he'd play like AC/DC, or like, he's really into X, and B-52s and REM, and a lot of like new wave stuff. And so I kind of had that as like a base layer. And then I guess when I got to be like 11 or 12, Nirvana became like the most popular band in the world. And I couldn't really like differentiate it from, like, I was just like, I like Nirvana, I like Public Enemy, I like Metallica, I like Guns N' Roses, and they were all the same. They were just like cool music to me. So it's kind of interesting. Then it was like, because I like Nirvana above all the other bands, then I started meeting all these other like, scummy rocker kids at school, probably in like 7th grade. And a couple of them were, I don't really know how they were into it, but they were just super into the local punk scene. And so we had a venue in town, and it became like trying to get permission to go to shows. Usually couldn't. A lot of like sneaking out at night to go to shows because my mom wouldn't let me, and that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it was a really like, the more entrenched I got in that specific scene of kind of like north of the San Francisco Bay Area punk scene, it was a fucking weird punk scene because it didn't really specifically connect with what was going on like in Berkeley at Gilman or anything. Although I did start going to shows there a little later on, but it was cool because it was all really tied into politics and like activism. And there were a lot of like really great bands, but no one ever left the area. So it's interesting because I'm like, in the mid 90s, I was seeing all these shows that I still think back on, and buying all these tapes and 7-inches and stuff of bands that I think were really talented, but they like never played anywhere except, my hometown and the adjacent towns. Although strangely, one of the first shows I ever went to at that venue, just because it was like a punk show, I was probably 13. I went and saw this band called AFI, who were from a town even smaller than I was from. And
the AFI?
The AFI. And they were probably like in high school at the time because they're a little bit older than me. Not much.
Wow.
But yeah, it was super funny just because I only went because my friends were like, all right, dude, we're going to go skate. We're going to go to this punk show. We're going to like get into whatever trouble, try and smoke some weed or something. And
yeah,
we went and saw this band, and it was just like fucking out of control in there. There were probably, there's probably 100 people there or something, but it seemed massive and crazy. And they were clearly people about my age. And it was just fucking, it's like hilarious to think back on because they were AFI from Ukiah, which is like really like the middle of fucking nowhere still, and they later moved to Berkeley and became a really big band probably 5 years after this.
When you saw them at that point, did they seem special? Were people really going off? Like, what was your impression at that time?
They did, but I think I didn't have enough of like a primer. Like, it was probably the 3rd or 4th, like, local punk show that I'd been to. And so I was like, well, this is clearly bigger than me going and seeing these other bands that I'm aware of locally. Like, there were enough people for it to be a crazy ass pit and stuff like that. So I knew enough to know that like musically they were doing something that was pretty tight and really good. They were a really different band then than they became. Yeah, I didn't see it and go like, this band's going to be huge, but I didn't have that wasn't even in my way of thinking yet at that point. It was just like, this is a crazy experience. That was, I think, all I took away from it.
Yeah, because you can't necessarily see it at first. It's very interesting how that works with bands sometimes. Like, I was in a YouTube wormhole the other month, and there's like an old video of My Chemical Romance playing, I think, the Fireside Bowl in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
And they look and sound just like any other band you'd see in the late 90s or early 2000s or whenever it was. And I'm just like, wow, like, how does it happen? It's wild.
It is really interesting. It's a funny thing. And it's like you hear those stories often talking to people, and like, I guess I've heard the other side too, where like the bass player from Loma Prieta, who he's, born and raised out in Florida. And he was telling some story recently where he was like, he went to a show, some band that was on tour had jumped on, and like everyone stood outside while they played, but he watched them and they were he's like, dude, this band's going to be huge. And they were called Fall Out Boy. And like, shortly thereafter, like they got a deal, a year later or something. And he was like, I knew it, like this band, whatever you think about Fall Out Boy, clearly they're like put on a good show or whatever. They're entertainers, so.
Say what you will about Fall Out Boy, but when you listen to them, and I'm talking about like the first record because I can hear the singles in my head.
Right.
It sounds super polished. The recording is super good. The guy can sing. You can hate the song, fine, but it sounds like it has mass appeal. You can't deny that.
Right. And, that kind of stuff bubbles to the top in punk rock sometimes. And most of it has not been for me. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I like shit that sounds totally disgusting, but yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. It's a funny thing with punk rock and sort of our attitudes about success and making it. It's kind of like when a band is successful by the terms of society at large, like punks are not any longer like down with it. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
you can't be part of the subculture and be part of the larger culture, I guess. And I think that's fair.
And yeah, that makes sense. Were you into Green Day at all? That's like a Bay Area thing, right?
Dude, this is a funny thing, right? Like, I remember starting 7th grade and it was just terrible. I'm like starting junior high school. And the first couple of weeks they were like, okay, we're going to have a career day. And you're going to like, write out your things you want to do with your life or whatever on this piece of paper. And at this point in time, like the notion of playing in a band hadn't even really occurred to me yet. It had probably started to later that year, but I put musician as like my top thing. And so, they would have these experts in the field speak. And this dude, this like British guy was speaking to us and he's like, yeah, I'm a sound engineer. I'm not the producer, but like I'm the guy that like mics things. And everyone's like, well, what have you worked on? Anything we've heard of? And he said, oh, I just finished recording this band called Green Day. Like no one our age had heard of them. I'm sure they were like massive in the punk scene at this point, but we were all 12 and 13.
Yeah.
And so it was like this funny thing where he said that. And then, dude, probably like 4 months later, Green Day was like on MTV and they were huge. But honestly, yeah, it was like I was into them sort of on the level that I was like into Nirvana and, Pearl Jam, whatever else was just, as far as marketing was concerned, it's all just like alternative rock or whatever.
Yeah, that's how I got into it, because you see all this stuff on MTV and I'm not thinking like punk scene, alt scene, rock scene. I'm just thinking like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Green Day. These are all good bands that I listen to.
Right. That was the beginning of 7th grade. And then by like the end of 7th grade, I was already kind of like, I was like growing my hair long, skating, going to punk shows. And then all the older punk kids I met were like, fuck Green Day, man. Like, we're going to protest the Green Day show. They're on a major label. Like, that's bullshit music. And I was, young and impressionable. And I was kind of like, yeah, that shit sucks. But I'm like, well, deep down, this shit is really catchy. And, it's like musically, it's undeniable. Like Dookie's a great record.
Yeah.
They're a very like unique band and they're great performers.
Yeah, I've gone full circle. It started as, hey, these are all cool bands I listen to. Then I was like, fuck the mainstream stuff, or most of it. And I was only into hardcore. Then I was like only into emo, and I was like, I'm too cool for anything heavy. Then I was just into whatever, only obscure stuff, only into post-rock. And then I was kind of into whatever. Now I've circled all the way back around. And it's just like in 4th grade again. I'm like, I just listen to bands. I don't give a shit. Like, I'll fucking listen to Jerome's Dream in 1 minute and then Collective Soul the next. I don't care.
Dude, it's so liberating, right?
Right. What about you? How has your progression been like that?
Probably pretty similar. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Lately, it feels like I feel a little stifled in what I listen to sometimes. And honestly, too, because I've been so busy with band stuff for the last, decade. I mean, I feel like I'm always working on a record and I have limited free time. And there's always something going on where it's like, okay, well, we got this new mix, or there's these demos or this stuff that I have to learn. So it's a lot of my music listening time is taken up like actually listening to my own bands, which I can't say like I enjoy that. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that's like a healthy relationship to have with music, but it does end up being a big part of it. And then aside from that, I'm kind of all over the place. It's like I do check out a lot of new hardcore stuff that comes out, but I really like just straight up like pop rap stuff and, ambient stuff. Trying to think. And then I spend a lot of time going back to the 90s because I can't help it,
Yeah. No, I like the sound of this. I listen to all that stuff. Ambient, pop rap stuff, 90s stuff. I'm checking out new heavy bands. I'm checking out new emo bands. It doesn't matter. As long as it's good, it's good.
Yeah, that's my feeling too. And I kind of just, I wish that I had the amount of time to devote to seeking music as I did 20 years ago or 25 years ago, like when I was in it's funny. I actually got this, I was texting my buddy the other day who I grew up with and I hadn't talked to in a long time. And he like sent me a picture of this, reissue record by this band Trackstar that we grew up really liking, who were like this super emo, like 2 guitar, no bass San Francisco band back in the mid 90s. And he's like, I got this record reissued. And then he's like, man, I want to thank you for like turning me on to so much good music when we were growing up. And it was like this very like nice compliment. And then I had to sort of like turn inward and go like, damn, dude, that's crazy. Like my identity was very much set up around like seeking music and spending all my money on records and being like really, really opinionated about music. Like I just fucking hated shit when I didn't like it. And I loved stuff so much when I did like it.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of what happened was like, once playing in bands took a front seat and became really like what I consider myself to be like doing with my life. Like I stopped having money to go buy records and because I was just spending it on equipment and trying to you're losing money going on tour and all the shit that you do playing in punk bands. And so, yeah, it's funny. It's kind of like, I'm like, man, my record collection was looking awesome. And then around 2002 or something, I fell off pretty hard, man.
Well, that's because you're part of it now instead of just a participant, which is good. It's a logical progression. Like, I used to just listen to music and I had a lot more free time. Now I'm involved with a band and doing this podcast, which is weekly. So, I'm in it instead of just listening to it. So there's not as much time. It sounds like the same thing for you, but let's talk about some of your early days playing leading up to Loma Prieta.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start playing? How? Lay it on us.
I started playing in bands. Well, okay, first I had like a crappy guitar from probably the time I was 9 or 10. And I had that older half brother who was like in some fucking wicked cover bands and stuff. Like he was just rocking in the 80s. And so it was kind of like he taught me a couple riffs. And I think I managed to get my dad to buy me a guitar for Christmas when I was probably 9 or 10. But then when I was in 7th grade, I somehow got the idea that it would be so much cooler if I played drums. And so, I had like some money from mowing lawns and doing whatever odd jobs, saving up some allowance or something. And I ended up finding this piece of shit drum set and buying it. And, I was terrible. But then because I had a drum set and some like shithead friends at school, it just sort of was like the school was small enough. I had a drum set. So I started playing music with some people. And before long, one of those people that I played with, it was like his mom would allow us to play at their house. So I had to leave my drums over there. And like within like 2 or 3 weeks of me leaving my drums over there, he was so much better than me at drums. And it was like, it was so funny. It was like, okay, well, I have a guitar and I can kind of play that. So I refocused I was like, okay, well, I better really get serious about this guitar thing because Devin's really good at drums. And so, that was sort of like the basis of everything. And that dude, Devin, is still, my best buddy. And we've played in bands together since then. It's been like almost 30 years. It's crazy. But yeah, and he's still a really fucking good drummer and better than me at guitar and, probably most things. He's a really good musician.
At least when you're that young, you have the foresight to be like, okay, he's the drummer now. I'm going to play guitar instead of stubbornly being like, no, I have to be better at drums. I'm going to drum.
Well, it was like, it was just head and shoulders. I was like, this guy clearly has like a natural aptitude towards this. And I mean, I did keep playing drums probably for 2 or 3 years after that because it's just fun to do. But
Yeah.
it was just like I was never going to catch up. And all I really wanted to do was like hang out and play music anyway. So it just kind of made logical sense. And I had a guitar and stuff. So it was like I had a guitar, but I needed an amp and I didn't really know what to do. So I like bartered, you'd like barter shit when you're that age. I don't know if kids still do that, but I was fully like, all right, man, I'm going to trade this Beck CD because I don't care about Beck anymore because I'm punk. And I'm going to trade like this jacket. I traded some dude like this collection of weird crap for this little like crate amp. And that's where it all started, man.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that still happens. Like the bass player in my band, I think he traded his bass for some weed or wait, he got his bass by trading some weed or something like that. And I was like, that's a good deal. Weed sucks.
I'm telling you, man, this is how, careers are formed.
So you get started playing locally. What were some of the first bands you were in?
Oh man. I'm trying to think the first bands that I think the first band I ever played a show with was basically like a pop punk band that was called The Disappointments. It would have been about 1995, and we were really bad. And then I think I was in a band called Kingman that did the same kind of shit. And then I was in a band called Xnob, which was my first, I guess the first band I was in. I would have been maybe 15 or 16 when we started this band, and it was definitely more like angular shit. Like it's like kind of like, this is the other thing too. I think that like there was no internet as far as I mean, it existed. I didn't use the internet at that point. And so I get into these bands, but like I had no concept of like whether they were similar or whether they were similar in popularity. And so I was kind of like, well, I like Sunny Day Real Estate and Pavement and Born Against and Shopmaker. And I just want to do all that. I was like, well, they probably all play shows together, man. Like they're all really fucking good, like no concept. So anyway, I was in this band that I think was trying to kind of like somehow fit all that stuff in. It was like a noisy indiecore kind of band. I started a band like maybe in 1999 or something. And I think we didn't tour until probably 2000. We were called Archaeopteryx. And that was kind of the band that I ended up meeting the guys from Loma Prieta through,
Yeah.
Because we actually got out toward the West Coast a lot for probably 4 or 5 years.
Were you touring like the whole US in that band?
No, we never really made it off the West Coast. And I always wanted to, but it was the kind of thing, I think I had that thing growing up where it was like, I had really good friends that I played music with who were really talented, but I was kind of like the only guy who was like, I will sacrifice anything for the band. Like I'll do anything to go on tour, like that kind of thing. And it would be like, so I was always booking tours, and then it would be like someone in the band would be like, you'd be a week away and they'd be like, oh, I forgot to get the time off work, like that kind of shit. And it was just so frustrating for me, because I was like, it's still the same, bands are fucking impossible because you're always reliant on other people. And like, it's what makes it so good as a form of creativity, I think, because you kind of, in the right format in a band, you like get the best from all parties involved and you make something that you could never have made by yourself.
Right.
None of you could have, but it's such a weird, like familial relationship to be in a band with people. And when things are out of balance like that, it's hard, it's like, I feel like I have known so many musicians over the years who I'm like, they're super talented. They just like got attached to these other people who didn't care as much to make it work. It's not even about talent. I think a lot of times it's like bands who like put in enough energy and have good enough luck end up sometimes like breaking through,
Yeah, because sometimes people just aren't, it's just not their priority sometimes. Did you see that Hard Times headline recently? It was like, unemployed band living together in punk house can't find the time to practice or something like that. It was, that really spoke to me. It's like, yes, like no matter what the situation is, like somebody's always got something else to do, or there's like something else going on. It's just sometimes you just can't pull it together.
Yeah, I know. It's so that, I mean, but that is what makes it that much better, I guess, when you find people who are, so many things have to line up for it to be great. You know what I mean? You have to like find people who are committed enough to show up, and you have the same taste in things, and you like the way each other play, and those things mesh. And you know what I mean? It's sort of amazing that it ever works at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, 100%. So talk about the beginning of Loma Prieta. How does it come together? How do we start getting out on the road?
It's funny actually. There's a Jeromes Dream connection here too, in a strange way. My band Archaeopteryx had been getting fairly, like established on the West Coast for a couple years, and I got, let's see, I'm trying to think how this went down. It was like I got an email from this dude, and he was like, "Hey, I'm booking this show. It's at a cafe with my band and Jeff from Jeromes Dream's new band." And I was like, "All right, man, we're there." I love Jeromes Dream. I knew that they had broken up. This would have been 2003 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so we showed up to the show, and then he was like, this guy Derek, who I'd never talked to aside from his email, was like, "Oh man, yeah, Jeff's band had to drop. But anyway, here we are." And I was sort of like, fuck, man. Okay, well.
Great.
And like this dude, Derek, I don't even think his band had any music online or anything. So I had no idea what to expect. They were called Sailboats. And I saw them play, and they were just like fucking phenomenal. So I became good friends with like he and Val, who Val played drums. And basically we started just giving each other a call when we go to shows or whatever. So there were probably like a year or two there where we were just buddies and would see each other at shows. And then I think Val came to an Archaeopteryx show or something. And I was like, "Hey man, like we live 10 miles from each other. Let's play sometime." And we got together and played, and it was just sort of like, there was totally musical chemistry right away. And he's like, let me see if Derek wants to play. Like he just sold all of his gear because he's like overplaying in bands, but let's see what we can do. And so we got Derek to come play, and he also is like a fucking shredder. He played in Loma Prieta on the first 2 LPs. So it was like that. And it was kind of funny because at that point in my life, I was probably 24 or something. And those guys were, I don't know, 19, or 20. They're younger than I am. And I felt at that point, like just prior to starting playing music with those guys, it was like Archaeopteryx wasn't doing that much. Like my buddy Devin had gotten married and kind of had gotten like a more serious job, which I kind of still are like out of my wheelhouse, And I was having these thoughts where I was like, dude, I'm 24, man. I'm going to be 25. Like I'm old. It's time to hang it up, like that kind of shit. Where I was like, I can't find anyone to play music with. Everyone my age is like getting married, it's like everyone's got serious shit to do. And it's like really comical to look back at that thought process now, because now I'm just like this dude in his 40s who's still, I'm probably devoting more time to it than I was then.
Yeah, same here. Like I remember being mid to late 20s and being like, "Oh, it's all over." But now I'm 41 and it's just getting started. It doesn't matter what age, you can do it whenever you want to do it.
It doesn't. And it was too much about like looking towards my peers and seeing what they were doing. And on some level, it's like I look like at those people's lives now, and sometimes I'm like, man, that looks really easy and simple. Like I've definitely chosen the hard road here, haven't I?
Yeah.
But the grass is always greener, I guess.
Always.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that was how Loma Prieta got started. And in that scenario, it was the kind of thing where like I remember we had not been playing that long, and Val was like, "Hey, I'm going to book a US tour." I was like, "Okay, like we have 5 songs. I'm like, let's fucking go, man." Like I've never been in a band with anyone that is even like given the time of day to doing a US tour. And so that kind of motivation and momentum, like it really like carried the band, I think that like that attitude has sort of always been there, where it's like, this is what we find fun. I'm not exactly sure why. There's a lot of suffering involved, but yeah, we've kept it going.
I love that. Yeah. Didn't you self-release the first couple LPs on your own label too?
Yeah, it was Val's label. And yeah, I want to say the first 3 LPs, and there were a couple EPs too that he put out kind of up until we ended up starting putting stuff out with Deathwish, which was, I think, 2012.
Yes.
Yeah, everything was totally DIY for a very long time. And large aspects of that band still are. I think just because we're particular, like we could probably use more help than we have, but the idea of like handing over control to people seems scary or something,
yeah.
Or just like angering more than scary. Like we're like, well, I know we're going to hate the way anyone else does it, so I guess we have to do it ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. That's why I do almost every aspect of this show by myself, and it's a lot of work, but that's how I want it.
Yeah, totally. Then you have final say. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you want to be as close to it as possible because you care about it,
Exactly. No, I like the DIY spirit though, which is something I didn't understand until recent years. the amount of work you have to put into it, and that if someone doesn't do it for you, you can just go out and do it yourself. Like you book your own US tour and you go out and do it. You put out your own records. Too much of my life I was sitting around thinking like someone was going to discover what a massive talent I was and like pull me up into some great pre-existing situation. But that doesn't work unless you're like Justin Bieber or some, massive talent or some shit like that.
Yeah, I know. It happens, but yeah, it's the flip side of it is like, I grew up on Fugazi and very much, like the ethics of that band had like shed a lot of light on the way that I was trying to approach music. But at some point I kind of realized like with Loma Prieta, once we kind of started, it took us a while. It took us, like 6 or 7 years of touring a lot, putting out our own records, all this stuff before I really felt like things were starting to like turn for us and people were paying attention. There was excitement. And then like booking agents started reaching out and management and stuff like that. And I realized that the reason we didn't want to do it was like selfish. Like it was totally like self-preservation where I'm like, I don't want someone else like having access to like portray our band in a certain way. Like I don't want to have to play with bands that I think are whack. Like,
yeah,
like I don't care about, obviously I care about our band. Like I don't want our band to implode. And on some level, it's kind of like your band you have to achieve something. Like you can't just totally eat shit on tour. You know what I mean? But yeah, so it's that thing where I had this realization where I was like, oh fuck man, like maybe Fugazi were DIY because that just made way more sense for them. And maybe they made a lot more money releasing their own records and booking their own tours than they would have if they gotten like caught up in this like music industry machine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Ian's got the notoriety. He's got the label. He doesn't really need anybody else. And it certainly doesn't seem like they wanted it to be like mainstream on that level. So there you go.
Right. And they didn't need to. So, it's interesting. I mean, not to compare my bands with Fugazi, we'll never, no one will ever reach those heights, but.
No, it's interesting to think about. I was just thinking about this today. Like I heard, I was in the scene, I was listening to the bands. I would hear this stuff all the time, DIY or die and all that stuff. But I was just thick-headed. I would just think it was all stupid. And then like, I'm sitting here today, like getting ready to do the podcast. And I'm like, wow, if I had actually listened to some of that and applied it, who knows what I could have done? Like I understand it all now, but better late than never.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's, there's plenty of lessons to be learned throughout this whole thing. The creative process is should be all about learning, I guess.
Yeah. So you said 6 years of touring and playing shows and all of this stuff until booking agents and everybody else started reaching out to you?
Yeah, it just kind of felt like until we put out a record on Deathwish. Well, the funny thing with that was too, that was our 4th LP that came out on Deathwish.
Was that IV?
Yeah. And almost everywhere we went after that, people would be, I don't remember how the question was framed, but people basically thought we were a new band. And I was like, oh no, God, we've been we've been playing for 8 years and touring for 7 or something at that point.
It's amazing how that happens, right? I'll have bands on the show and I'm like, oh wow, this is an exciting and awesome new band that must have come out this year. And then I start researching and they've been around for like 15 years. And I'm like, whoa, wow, you just don't know until you know.
Exactly. It happens to me all the time with bands, like there's so much music out there. So I was definitely not faulting anyone, but it was that kind of thing where I'm like, oh yeah, it's interesting. Like I never gave any like credibility to the idea that like being on a label would help. I was like, well, that's stupid. Like, who cares? If the music's good, people will seek it out. Like I always did back in the day. But it's, things also like changed a lot between when I was really like stacking up my record collection and getting crazy with all that stuff. It was like you would basically order stuff without hearing it, oftentimes because of like reviews. Like I just like had a subscription to Heart Attack, and that was my like, all I paid attention to was that. And then you'd buy a record, you thought it was cool. Oftentimes there would be like an insert inside of it that would be like some giant distro that some kid was running, and it would just be descriptions of bands. And that was how I bought a lot of stuff. A lot of my favorite records, like records that totally changed my life. It's crazy to think about that. And so, of course, like Loma Prieta comes around. It's like definitely during the like MySpace era, where it's like you can go and hear like 2 songs of a band online, which was revolutionary. And of course, by the time like, 2012 and we are kind of on a record label for the first time and that kind of thing, like the music universe was already like inundated. At that point, you could basically find anything you wanted. And I mean, back then it would be like you just download it all for free. Like that was the sort of pre-Spotify thing.
Yeah, once, I don't know, 2002 hit, once the year 2001 hit, you could just download anything you want all the time.
Right. Yeah. And there was a good 10 years there where that was kind of like just the standard. So
yep.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, well, it got to a point where maybe we like needed that little bump of visibility, just being, involved with this label that people knew that they liked the bands on that label. And I think at the time too, Deathwish were putting out a ton of releases. And so people were looking to that label like the way that I'd looked to, like when I was a kid, it would be like anything that came out on Gravity Records, I would buy. Because whether or not I liked it, I knew it was going to be challenging. I felt like I should like it, even if I didn't. You know what I mean? It was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You kind of have these labels that you
trust them.
You trust that they're putting out like music that's important or whatever. So, it was fortunate for us in the sense that Deathwish like took the chance on us at that point.
And the marketing works because I didn't hear Loma Prieta till later because I don't know what I was doing in 2000, 12.
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
I can't remember. But I saw the record cover and I remember it.
Oh, cool.
Like I remember that gray record cover. I remember the band name. Like I recognized it.
Yeah. I mean, that's, not only is there so much music, there's so much good music,
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel bad about all the great shit that I've never heard.
You just haven't heard it yet.
Exactly.
It comes to you when it comes to you. Even if you're not looking, like I'm not always actively seeking new music. I kind of am because of this show, but I'm also not because I'm busy a lot of the times, but it finds you.
Right.
It just finds you.
God, I hope so.
It will.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
So I guess you saw a nice bump when she signed with Deathwish, right?
Yeah, it felt like, I mean, I think some things sort of fell into place for us maybe around 2010 or something. It just was like, I don't remember specifically what was going on, but I think Val had been at school the whole time. Like he went to law school. And so it was sort of like we were able to tour for the first few years, like only in the summer and sporadic things or whatever. And then it all hit where it was kind of like we were all like sort of half unemployed. He wasn't in school anymore. And we just started being like, let's fill all of our time with touring. So that, I mean, maybe 2012 was reaping the benefits of a couple of years of being way more present leading up to that. But whatever it was, it just started feeling like we weren't struggling to get shows. And we would sometimes show up to places and be like, wow, there's twice as many people here as last time, like that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it definitely speaks to the power of like touring a lot. And maybe that was just for our band, because I know I've talked to people who are sort of like, yeah, man, we toured a lot. We toured, constantly for 5 years and it just felt like it was going nowhere. So we stopped or whatever. And I don't know, like I was saying earlier, I think a lot of it just has to do with good luck. And I also think like BK, who plays in Loma, has a crazy aesthetic sense. And I think that like a big part of the success of the band, which I use air quotes in saying success because, we're no big deal. But like, I think that a lot of the reason that we've stood out is because Brian is really good at like portraying our band using visuals that like speak very much to how we sound and the feel of our band and like creates sort of a whole narrative, Yeah,
the aesthetics are great. Like I'm talking about, I recognize that album cover from whenever I saw it. And, I didn't hear the band until later. And the band doesn't exactly sound like everything else, which is always good. Mm-hmm. It's just the whole presentation is great.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
It's a nice thing to say.
Of course. So the last LP was in 2015, Self-Portrait?
Yeah.
Now, I think there's been a couple singles since then, maybe a split, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to even think. I feel like there's only been like a single, maybe?
There was a new single that came out in July of 2022, Sunlight, yes?
Oh, yeah. And we put out a 7-inch, I guess in 2020, but it had been recorded a couple years before.
So what happened after 2015? What's going on?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think actually, I guess I can sum it up pretty easily. It's like, I think in 2015, maybe 2014, our other guitar player, Brian, moved to New York. And James, our bass player, since I think 2013, lives in Jacksonville, Florida. So we went from 3 of us being in the Bay Area, who, Brian had been in the band since the second LP. So it was kind of like the core of the band was all in one place and we'd all been playing together for the majority of the band. And then when he moved to New York, I think it really like slowed our progress, you know? And so it became the thing where we'd carve out time for the band, but it would be like, okay, well, it's either a tour or it's for writing. So we were kind of splitting the time. And then it just took us forever to like with this record that's coming out this year, we just kept writing and throwing stuff away. And, you know, I just think we were kind of like, well, there's no pressure. There's no reason for us to just force a record, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we're all kind of like getting more critical as time goes on, you know? And so it's the kind of thing where we're like, well, we don't need a record to be out for tour. We never put anything out that we're not totally happy with. So it just took forever for us to basically like, you know, we have to have come up with 30 or 40 ideas. And then in the end, you know, we finally kind of like got it together, but it ended up really being like Brian ended up getting like a contract job in the Bay Area for a year. And so then suddenly the three of us were in the Bay again. And we'd already been like flying back and forth and like sending stuff, you know, sending emails and stuff, sending songs back and forth. So we had the basis of like a lot of good ideas. And then once we were able to kind of be like, all right, we're going to get in the studio, the practice space, like, you know, 2 or 3 times a week and like hammer on this stuff for a year. And especially it kind of got to like, I guess the pandemic kind of fucked us up, but in a way kind of focused us to like, we probably had half the record written before the pandemic dropped on us.
Yeah.
And then I guess eventually, you know, it was kind of like we were like sending a lot of stuff back and forth. We were kind of like able to play everyone. We were kind of in a bubble together, I guess, because it was like none of us were really around other people aside from like our partners. And so we would get in the studio and work on this shit all masked up and as far away from each other as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember the COVID bubbles? Like who's in your bubble? Is it safe?
Dude, it was, I felt like I was going back to the MySpace top 8 or whatever, you know? It was like, all right, man, like, you're going to be in my bubble.
Yeah.
We got to be tight, you know?
So there is a new record coming.
There's a new record coming out on June 30th of this year.
Ooh.
It's called Last. And I don't know, man. I think it's kind of good.
How could it not be?
I know. Well, I've built it up enough, so I hope it is. But yeah, it was, you know, it's been a long time coming. And it was kind of like, it is funny too, because it would be the kind of thing where we think that we're a really active band, but then anytime we post online or something like, all right, we're doing this tour, you know, because it's for us, we're like, well, we still have kind of done some, we'll do, you know, 2 weeks to a month a year or something. And every time we post like a tour poster, someone will comment like, oh, damn, you guys are still together. I thought you broke up. You know, we're like, dude, we're working on this band. Like we're still writing songs. We're still touring as much as makes sense.
No, this is good because you're getting those reunion dollars. That's big now. So, you know, every time you take a little break, people think you're gone. And then it's like, oh, we're back. We're reunited.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's true.
Yeah.
We could have played our cards better on that one because I feel like a lot of bands do the full, like, we're breaking up tour.
Yeah.
And then in a shorter time than 8 years, they come back and reunite. Whereas for us, we just didn't break up. And now we're putting out a record 8 years later. Just because time flies, not because we didn't want to, you know, and everyone's like, all right, just a bunch of lazy musicians, I guess, you know?
No, here's what you do. Market it as a reunion record and tour and make up some story about a big fight or something like that and how you guys overcame it.
Damn. All right. Cool. You're hired. This is great advice.
This is a show of ideas, Sean. This is a show of ideas.
I can tell, man. They're flying. They're flying fast.
So, Sean, you have joined Jeromes Dream on guitar. Did you read about this? Did you hear about this?
I have heard that I have joined Jeromes Dream.
Yes.
Yeah. It's that's something I didn't really expect to happen. Like, you know, when I first heard Jeromes Dream.
Yeah. That's big news. How did it happen? Tell us about it.
Well, there were sort of whispers, you know, like I guess it would be 5 years ago now, that Jeromes Dream were going to reunite. And I had never known anyone in Jeromes Dream, but the other members of Loma Prieta had known Jeff, I guess right when Jeromes Dream broke up, you know, in the early 2000s. Jeff moved from New York to San Francisco. And so he had somehow like been in the same social circle with Val and Derek and the guys from Loma Prieta kind of prior to my knowing them. And so they'd always be like, Jeff's out here somewhere, man. But, but it was kind of like they knew him. Then they lost touch with him, had no access to Jeff, couldn't ask him any questions, you know? So anyway, I started hearing that they were going to reunite in 2018. And then one day I got this mysterious email, and it was Eric, and he's like, "Hey, it's Eric from Jeromes Dream. We were talking about playing some shows, and we were curious if, like Loma Prieta would want to play with us. You're the first band that came to mind." And I like literally thought someone was fucking with me. You know what I mean? Like I was like, man, like someone's playing with my emotions here, because I love Jerome's Dream. And
Yeah.
It seemed like, even though I'd sort of heard through the rumor mill, this was, I think, prior to them like announcing that they were going to do anything. So anyway, so Eric's like, "Yeah, man, you want to like get on a phone call and we can like, see what this is about." And so I got on a phone call with Eric, and it was like, dude, I was nervous as if I was like going on a date or something,
Yeah.
But because first off, I'm just not in that situation very often where I have to like get on a phone call ever in my life. And I have arranged my life that way because I'm bad on the phone. But yeah, it was just sort of like talking to Eric, and he's such like a level-headed and like interesting person to talk to. And he was just like so enthusiastic about them playing together again, and was saying that they'd written all the stuff they were super psyched on, and just talking about how he kind of like lost touch for the most part with the other members, and how like happy they were to be back at it. So of course I was, I and everyone else in Loma Prieta were like, absolutely, just tell us when. Like, we'll be there. We love your band. This is going to be great. So we ended up booking a tour with them, an East Coast tour in 2019, and it went really well. And I guess in the sort of like intervening time before that tour, Jeff hit me up and he's like, "Hey, I live in San Francisco. We should just hang out." And so I like went and hung out with Jeff, which was another one of those things like the phone call with Eric, where I was like, man, this is strange. I'm just going to hang out with someone. A couple old dudes hanging out, I guess, getting a beer, like, what is this going to be like? I never do this because all my whole social life is like this organic thing where I'm like basically like meeting people at shows, and
Exactly. Yeah. I've been in that same situation. You're like, what am I going to do? What's it going to be like?
Right. I'm like, this just feels like something that normal people do, and I'm not a normal person. Like, I'm going to go just like hang out with some dude that I don't know.
What are we going to do? Like, what?
I know.
How long am I going to have to be there?
Right. Like, how does this work? What do you do? But it ended up being super cool. Like, I immediately, it was like in the first minute, I was like, "Oh, Jeff's fucking awesome, man. This guy's great." And so
yeah,
we became buds, and yeah, he's the best.
I had Jeff and Eric on this podcast back when it was still called the Northeast Scene, and great guys. And I was so happy that I can't remember if it was before Eric moved out to San Francisco, but he moved out there and the band just stayed together and kept writing, and I was really happy for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome. And it is one of those things too, this is sort of an aside, but like, when I was talking about how when I was growing up, I had people to work on music with who were really talented and who I was like very like fortunate to have around, but I had such a hard time finding people who like wanted to do it like with the frequency that I did. So like knowing and playing with those guys now, I always can't help it. I'm sort of like, man, I'm jealous that when you guys were 17, 19, 21, whatever, you like had each other and you were like approaching it with this like ferocity, where you just like couldn't get enough. You wanted to like do whatever it took to get in a car and tour the US and all this kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is those guys like still have that same exact like level of energy and sort of attitude towards it, which is like, for me, it's like I'm trying to keep up because I feel my age now. You know what I mean? So it's like the level of enthusiasm that Jeff and Eric are bringing to the band is like totally inspiring, and definitely is like helping me to like level up just sort of my like ambitions towards the band being good, I think. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, going back, so it was like went on a tour with their band, and they toured a lot in 2019. It seemed like they were out for basically like 6 months with a few little breaks. And then I ended up getting a phone call from Eric kind of at the beginning of 2020. And he was like, "Hey, we have some dates booked in Europe, but we need like a guitar player, like a second guitar player to come with. Like, would you be interested?" And I, of course, was like, well, it's funny because, I've never like filled in a band before, that kind of thing. Like, it's been offered, but it's always like my attitude towards playing in bands has always kind of been, what I like about it, like I of course like playing shows, but my favorite parts of being in bands are like the creative aspect. Like I really like writing songs, and I like, you know, nitpicking and getting into all that stuff. And I really, really like making records. Like you know, production is probably my favorite part. And I think my strong suit in being in a band, because I'm not a great guitar player. I know how to make shit sound fucked up, and I like doing that.
See, here I'm thinking you must be great to join Jerome's Dream, because that's some pretty intricate stuff.
Well, it's definitely like the kind of thing where I'm like, we align really well, you know? It's
Yeah.
as far as, I mean, I'm sure I've had a lot of like influence from them. I love their band from the time I first heard them. I think I first heard their band probably around the time they broke up, and was immediately like a big fan. Anyway, yeah, when they asked if I would like come play guitar for them, they're like, yeah, we have like, you know, 6 shows or something in Europe. Like, do you want to come play these shows? And I immediately, you know, I didn't even have to think about it. I was just like, yeah, of course, you know, like I had never considered it for anyone else that had asked, but it's like, I love hanging out with those guys. Their band is one of my favorites, you know, so didn't really have to give it any thought. And so then like at the time, Eric was living in LA. And so he came up, and he and Jeff and I played, and it was like immediate. We were just playing their songs, you know, like they had kind of said, like, we're going to play these 10 songs or whatever. And I kind of figured them out partially. But the musical chemistry was so there kind of immediately. I was like, dude, this is great. And I think we all walked away we practiced for a weekend, and we were all kind of like, dude, this sounds really fucking good. This is crazy. So that was kind of like how it came together. But that was February of 2020. And we were supposed to go on this tour in April. And so
right before the end times.
right, exactly. So I remember it being this funny thing where it was like we played, and then we had like another weekend scheduled, and then that was like in mid-March or something that we were supposed to play again. And it was sort of like me texting Jeff like, hey man, this COVID thing looks kind of bad, huh? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. We already have the plane tickets for this tour though. And I'm like, yeah, this is probably not going to happen though, right? You know, like we're like looking at this thing, like it seems very unlikely that, as bad as this is looking, that somehow like it's just going to clear itself up and we're going to be able to go on tour.
I didn't believe it until New York City shut itself down.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I just thought it was another hype like SARS or bird flu thing.
It was hard for me to imagine that it was going to be, I mean, I think we all kind of feel that way. And especially for you, like being in New York was like a whole other level, you know, it seemed, maybe it was just a media portrayal, but it seemed like that was really some serious end times shit as far as, you know, looking at it from an outside perspective.
It was, because I had never experienced anything like that before, and it was very confusing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really redefined a lot of things, I think, you know.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yeah, that was kind of how it came to be that I started like playing music with those guys, you know. And then later Eric moved up here, and it was like when Eric moved up here, then it became, you know, it was kind of that same thing where it was 2020, and the only people that I would hang out with were Eric and Jeff and, you know, obviously my partner who I live with, but, and like the Loma guys, and that was it. And so since we were hanging out all the time, we're like, it just sort of made sense that we should go and try and get in the studio and just play. So kind of like once it felt safe enough to do that, we started getting in the studio and playing, and it kind of coincided also with me being done recording this new Loma Prieta record. And I kind of have this bad habit of, because bands always have downtime, you know, I end up like finishing a project with a band, and then like subconsciously I can't stop working on music, so I like start new bands.
Yeah.
And in this case, I joined a pre-existing band, which is something I'd never really done before, but same kind of thing where I'm like, all right, man, well, I did it again. I could have had some peace and quiet, but now I just got to fucking work full time and play in bands full time and work on my house full time. And, you know,
like your side band became Jeromes Dream, and you're on the new record, right? You recorded the new record with them.
I did. Yeah.
That's pretty massive. It's a good move.
It felt cool. You know, it just worked out. But well, it was funny too, because the three of us started playing, and kind of like immediately, I feel like in the first practice or two, we definitely had like song ideas. And I think we were all, I mean, I was definitely pushing initially, like, this is a new band. What should we call this band? You know, like that kind of thing. And it kind of was, I think we were living in that land for a couple months where it was like, we're writing stuff. and it just kept like amassing, and the songs were really good. And then the more we all listened to them, we're like, dude, it would be so ridiculous to not have this be called Jerome's Dream, because it sounds fucking like Jerome's Dream.
Yeah, plus like 2 members of Jerome's Dream. Well, I mean, wait, how many people are in the band? It's Eric and Jeff and you. Is it just the 3 of you?
Yeah, it's just the 3 of us now, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, 2 out of 3 of the people are Jerome's Dream. So by math itself, it kind of has to be Jerome's Dream.
I think so. I'm outnumbered. Like, what am I going to do, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just that funny thing where we like crossed over into that realm where we're like, I guess this is a Jerome's Dream record we're writing, or it's Jerome's Dream by a different name, you know, because it sounds like Jerome's Dream. And there's just something very specific about the way that Eric and Jeff play together, you know, that I came to realize. You know, it's funny also when you've listened to a band a lot and then to like go on the inside and see how the mechanics of it work. And I'm like, oh, like I totally get why they sound like this. Like I could never like surgically like pick it apart until I sort of was in the writing process with them. But everything is so rhythmic in that band. And I think there's a lot of crazy dynamics that happen with the rhythm section that is unique, you know? And so, and just playing styles, you know?
They are someone I draw from either directly or subconsciously. And I didn't discover them until much later because I don't know, I would get locked into one genre and kind of hang out there. But now I'm listening to everything. And, you know, even like when I had them on the show, what's that 2003? What was that last record that they put out that Iodine reissued?
Oh, Presents.
Yeah. Even with Presents, like they're talking about how people didn't like the vocals initially, even though that vocal style I love, I kind of like draw from that because the band I'm doing now is more in that world, like of that sound than anything else. So there's just a lot to draw from either subconsciously or directly. There's a lot of good stuff there.
I agree. It's interesting. I mean, it's helping me. And I think that's sort of one of the great things about playing music with people. It's kind of like every time you play with somebody who has a unique approach, you like end up just sort of like by osmosis, like picking up aspects of how they play. And like you learn tricks and things that make music more interesting by playing with people that do interesting things. And so, you know, yeah, with those 2 guys and the way they play together, it's definitely like, it just is always going to sound like Jerome's Dream. Like, you know what I mean? It's like the sound of the band has an awful lot to do with the rhythm section, which I guess I knew that. I mean, every part of that band is just sort of like off the wall and I can't really compare it to anything else, you know?
Exactly.
It's a very unique band coming, you know, the approach and the influences and everything are just sort of like, I don't think anyone else has sort of like done it the way they've done it.
I think that's a great thing to have something like that doesn't particularly sound like anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It's what I've always kind of sought, you know, and it's definitely what I was, once I sort of got a foothold into being into punk rock and stuff, that was what I was always seeking out within this, you know, music world, was like bands that were sort of undefinable, I guess, you know, that's like prerequisite for stuff that kind of moves me. And, you know, it's like bands that that are unmistakable, I guess. Is
that what you go for when you're writing too?
Well, I don't know if there's so much specific thought, you know. It's being in a band is a weird thing because it does end up being the combination of the people involved. And so like, I never know how things are going to come out, and it's always a surprise in a way. And it's like, you're in this room with people, and no matter sort of like how the parts get introduced or whatever, everybody's parts come together, and you're sort of like until you hear it back, you don't really know what you're working with in a way. And so it's funny because, you know, I mean, you're a musician, like, you know, you'll have those moments where you're playing music with people and you like record a little demo of the song or whatever. And sometimes you listen back like that night at home and you're like, man, this kind of sucks. or there are times where you're like, dude, this is better than I even thought it was, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. The thing I'm doing now, we record a lot and often don't go back and listen to it. And thank goodness one of the guys in the band brought something back and they're like, listen to this. And I'm like, wait, this is us? Like, I'm playing that? That's cool. Yeah. Like we and I was like, we need to make a habit of actually listening to what we record. we'll do recording sessions and listen back to it. Like, this is good.
Yeah, that's what it takes. You got to delegate, it's like,
Yeah.
you're like, all right, well, on the first week of the month, I'll be the guy that, someone has to take that role, go back and listen to the practice tapes and, mine all the cool ideas. Cause things come up.
That's good advice. And I'll never be that guy, cause I just have too much going on. I don't have time to do anything. So, all right, that's good. We're going to delegate that task.
Yeah. You got to find like a, if you're a 4-piece, you find like a 5th member who their only job is to come and find the good riffs, You find someone from the outside, then I guess then you're really turning into some, like boy band, Backstreet Boys shit. If you start bringing in outside people and producers,
we're not big enough to have a outside person yet,
Well,
eventually
it's something to strive for or not,
Listen, there's a lot of exciting things happening. We've got the new Jeromes Dream record coming, The Gray in Between, that comes out May 5th, right?
That's right. Yeah.
We're excited about that.
So pumped about that. Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to it. We have a US tour that is planned to coincide with that.
Full US?
A full US tour. Well, a US tour aside from the West Coast, because we did that very recently, but everywhere else. And I don't want to say everywhere because someone out there is going to be like, dude, you're not playing Billings, Montana. And I don't think we're playing Billings. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we're doing as much of a full US tour as I've ever done almost. And it's going to be awesome.
Amazing. And there's a new Loma Prieta record coming out. What's the record called again? Tell the people the name and when they can expect it, if that's announced yet.
The new Loma Prieta LP called Last is coming out June 30th on Deathwish. And we have some tour dates we're working on for that. TBA.
So it's got to feel good. You've got a new record coming out on Iodine. You've got another record coming out on Deathwish. You're doing it all. That's got to feel pretty good.
It feels great. Yeah. I feel so lucky for the support, from both of those labels, and just to still be doing it, I guess. It's great to, I guess, just that I have all these bandmates who are still passionate about music and keep me excited about music. And, there's nothing I like better. It's kind of what keeps me going. It's what I'm, like I said earlier, it's kind of like what I consider myself to be doing with my life, even though it's never been, my primary source of income.
What is your primary source of income? What are you doing when you're not out there on the road performing?
Well, I work in the photo industry. I'm a post-production guy. I do digital tech work and retouching on commercial photo shoots and that kind of thing. And I've been doing it for a long time.
That's awesome. Isn't it great to have that backup too? Like, I've been in bands since I'm 24 years old, I guess, but I was never in a band that toured full time or took off or anything like that. So I've always worked jobs, and I did fall ass backwards into a well-paying career, which is very nice. So I'm glad that I have that part covered. Now I just need to build up the music thing a little more.
Yeah, I mean, it all happens when it's supposed to, I think. And as idealistic as I was when I was growing up, it's at some point it was kind of like, well, it's like I don't have anything to fall back on, so I need to figure out how to make some money. And I mean, I was kind of raised in the punk scene to think that making money through music was sort of like an evil pursuit, which that's hyper idealistic. And I kind of feel like people in punk no longer feel as strongly about that as they did, at least in the punk community I grew up in. But anyway, aside from that, it's like bands are the worst possible way that I've ever found to make money.
Yeah.
So, the people I know who seem to be making a go of it typically have carved out some other little spot in the music industry, I guess, where they're making their money, be it screen printing or booking or having a label or whatever it is. Because the actual act of being in a band, it's like, even if the band somehow on paper looks profitable, which it probably won't because everything's expensive, then there's still 4 or 5 of you. And it's just such a long shot for anyone to really make any substantial living doing it. but that doesn't, that's no reason not to do it.
Yeah, and by the way, this whole attitude of like you're playing music, you shouldn't want money or expect money or get paid money, especially in the punk scene. I don't know how this started, but we need to stop this. It's like some deep-seated capitalism game or something like, oh, you're in a punk band, you can't get paid, you shouldn't want to get paid. You go to the venue takes a cut of the merch, the venue gets all the money from the bar, you don't get any piece of that. Maybe you get paid, maybe you don't. No, we're in a band, we're out there working, pay us. Now, we're not saying, we're not gouging, but musicians should be paid. They should be paid.
Yeah, I feel like everyone else down the chain gets paid. Bands often don't. I don't really know how to remedy that, but someone recently, I can't remember who it was talking. I was having a conversation with someone where they were like, it felt like up until recently asking for more than $5 for a punk show was sometimes frowned upon.
Yeah.
And it was like, man, have you looked at, like 80s Black Flag posters? They were charging $5. Do you know what it costs to buy like a gallon of milk in 1985 or a car? Like it costs like 1/6 as much. You know what I mean? Like, dude, we got to catch up. And so something happened, during the pandemic where it started seeming like now I go to punk shows and it seems like people charge $15 for punk shows and no one's upset by it. And I'm kind of glad to see it. And I don't mind paying it because to me, like, I mean, that's a cheap date. You know what I'm saying? Like going to see, I'm like, dude, I can go see like some fucking piece of shit movie for $20, or I can go to an awesome punk show for 12. Like that's a great deal.
Exactly. And, when we were growing up, shows were $5, $10, $15 at the most, but I have to say I'm startled though. Maybe I need to go back on my words here of paying musicians. A well-known band that we all know and love is going on tour soon, and I did purchase a ticket. Guess how much the ticket was?
God, I hope you're not going to tell me like $60 or something.
No, $66.
60. Maybe they were trying to do some Sign of the Beast shit with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, are they super metal? Was it 66 and 66 cents or something?
No.
Fuck. All right.
Maybe I haven't been paying enough attention. Like I went to see Meshuggah in 2011, and I remember that being $44, I think, for one ticket. And I was like, okay, it's Meshuggah.
Right.
But like, yeah, $66 is, I don't know, man. It just seems like too much. But it's fine.
But that's kind of painful. I mean, Ticketmaster is getting at least like $44 of that. They're getting the full Meshuggah ticket price out of that.
I think that's it. I think it's all the charges. Like I would pay $40 to see this band, no problem. But maybe I shouldn't blame them for all the Ticketmaster charges, or maybe I should. I don't know. I'll think about it.
Yeah, the whole thing needs to change, but it's gonna be a long road.
Pearl Jam tried it in the 90s.
True.
Jeromes Dream will try it again on their upcoming tour and only play off the beaten path venues with zero charges, right?
That's right, man. Billings, Montana. I'm telling you.
It's going to happen. Well, Sean, I'm very excited for all the new music. I can't wait to hear everything. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Keith, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for letting me, ramble on about all this stuff. Had a lot of fun.
Of course. Hopefully I'll catch you out there when you're playing.
I would love that.
And there you have it. Sean Leary. Great conversation. Great guy. It was awesome to hear more about Loma Prieta. I discovered them more recently. I love everything I've heard from Last so far. That's going to be a great record, I can tell already. And now he's in Jeromes Dream, too. A very welcome addition. I mean, The Gray in Between is easily one of my favorite records of the year, and definitely one of my favorite from Jeromes Dream. So, awesome. Really looking forward to going to that show and meeting Sean and the rest of the band in person. Also, I've never seen Jeromes Dream, so that'll be exciting. So yeah, great conversation. Thank you so much, Sean, for coming on the show. So how are we doing? It's Memorial Day weekend. The weather is fantastic. Not too hot, not too cold. Perfect. Sunny. I hope everybody got to go out and do something. I didn't really. There's a lot of stuff to catch up on here. I'm getting ready for this run of Darling Fire shows. There's some equipment stuff I have to work out. I wanted to get some chores done, laundry, clean up. There's a lot of stuff to do around here. And my recurring story lately is I need to make more time for myself. You know, I mentioned that I'm back in therapy, and that's really helping out with some things I go through on a regular basis. But something she pointed out, which I didn't even realize, is that I sort of turned all of my hobbies into jobs, right? Podcast started out as a hobby, and, well, it started out as a hobby, like the first 4 episodes, but right away it became weekly. And as soon as it became weekly, it became a bit more of a job. And look, the podcast is great, and I love doing it, but it's a lot of work. Don't be fooled. It is a lot of work. So there's that, and music. You know, music was more of a hobby before. I'm taking it a little more seriously now that I'm in a band that gets out and tours a bit and is on a label and all that stuff. So I just need to take more time for me. And I did that this past week. There was no interviews to do, which was great. I'm playing Resident Evil 2 Remake. Has anyone out there played it? I never played it. I'm playing it for the first time, and it's terrifying. And I haven't even gotten to Mr. X yet. So once he's on my trail, it's going to be a lot scarier, I imagine. But I made a little bit of progress in that game, and it just felt really good. I felt like I accomplished something, and I'm having fun. And did you ever play any of those new Wolfenstein games? The ones that they remade? There's a DLC from one of them called Wolfenstein: The Old Blood. And I got stuck on the final boss in 2018 and just never finished it. So I fired it up last night and beat the boss. And I really felt like I accomplished something. I was so happy. That made me happier than anything I've done recently. You know, just taking some time out, relaxing, and accomplishing something in a game. I don't know. It makes me happy. And did anyone watch that PlayStation event recently where they announce everything that's coming up? I think the most exciting news out of that is the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. Now, I haven't played any Metal Gear games past Part 1, but they're releasing this Legacy Collection that has the first 5 games, meaning the very, very first one, the second one, and Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to get that because I've only played 1 and part of 2. I would like to go through that series. It's a highly acclaimed series. I haven't played all of them, and I want to. So I commit to sitting around more and just watching TV or playing video games or doing something that isn't work so that I don't burn myself out. I have to. But that's it for this week. So we're moving into June, and June is a really exciting batch of shows. You know, this whole year has been great. I think this has been the best year of the podcast ever. We've had such a run of incredible guests, you know, people that I just dreamed of speaking to. We've had on the show at this point, and June is no exception. It's going to be awesome. So I'm back next week with a new episode and a new guest. So thanks everybody for listening, and until next time.